Welcome to an interview with Sam Clark, the author of The Inland Sea, brought to you by the Worthen Library. This interview was recorded on February 3rd, 2021, and the beginning got a little cut off, so you'll start right at the beginning of Sam reading his wonderful book. Thank you.
He liked to go out to the island when the current owners weren't around, stay in his house for a week or two, read a few books, ice fish a little. He imagined his old life had worked out. He spent a lot of time walking about the island. He went into all the houses. They all used the same key, and he still had the copy he'd been given at age 8. It was worn and shiny. He loved to touch it. If he ever lost that key, he would grieve for weeks. In his own house, he would look in every corner. He reread the books on the shelves. He looked at the pictures over and over, particularly those that included his wife and son. The pictures of his wife made him uncomfortable. They hadn't been getting along, but he knew his disappearance had been a cruel trick, no matter how he tried to explain it to himself or, in his imagination, to her. The trip across the lake took about 25 minutes. As he approached the cove, he saw a curl of smoke from the chimney of his house and footprints in the snow leading from the waterside toward it. Next to the dock, sitting at an odd angle, was a huge, modern-looking black snowmobile with a 6-foot cargo sled hitched behind it. He knew immediately that if he were smart, he would turn around and head back to Tupper Lake. But coming here was always a bit of a game to him, putting himself in situations where he might see someone he recognized or who recognized him. He couldn't imagine who would be here in January. Against his better judgment, he kept going. He shut down his machine and walked toward the house. I'm going to stop there. So the next little section introduces Fred Davis. He's the detective in charge of the case when it becomes a case. He's from South Hero, and he grew up and still lives at a farm, which if you were at the library would be maybe a 8-minute drive and located on the west side of South Hero Island, facing toward New York. He's a local boy. Okay, on April Fool's Day, 2008, Detective Fred Davis decided to move out of his house in Burlington and live on the water. It was a decision slow in coming. At one time or another, Davis had worked for every type of law enforcement agency in Vermont: town cops, sheriff's office as deputy, Coast Guard, Fish and Wildlife, and city police beat cop in Burlington. Now he was a state police detective, a sergeant working out of St. Albans, a small city right on Lake Champlain, not far from the Canadian border. He worked all sorts of cases, but sometimes his beat was the lake itself, which he knew as well as a person could in one lifetime. He was 53, 2 years from mandatory retirement. He was thinking of living aboard. He had been thinking of living aboard for years. Maybe this was the time. The closest thing to a real city in Vermont was Burlington, a university town right on the lake. Davis's work had occasionally taken him down Star Farm Road near the Burlington bike path. He would see the boat sitting on a trailer in a driveway of a nondescript little colonial. It was basically a lobster boat with the rear deck mostly enclosed as a cabin. For boat lovers, style's everything. This boat had style. It was obvious even under the blue tarps, just from the shape of the bow rising in an elegant curve. The tarp obscured what might be inside. Dangling crookedly from the propellers was a for sale sign with a phone number. Eventually, he started inventing excuses to drive down Star Farm Road. This went on for 2 or 3 years. The for sale sign was fading. Davis knew that for him, buying a new boat was a particularly effective strategy for evasion. When he wanted to avoid some major life question, he tended to get obsessed with some boat. By the time he had found it, researched it, bought it, and got it going properly, he would have totally forgotten the real issue at hand. His life wasn't exactly in crisis, but he was having doubts about his work. He was also finally realizing that his relationship with his son and his family wasn't what it should be. It was cordial but not close. The issue that threatened to bother him the most was his relationship with his ex-wife, Diane. The problem there was he still loved her. None of these things were easy to fix. Better to buy a boat. On April 1st, he called the owner of the lobster boat. He asked him if the boat was still on the market, and the owner replied, "Everything's for sale at the right price." That's that section. And then let me find the other page. This other section introduces maybe my favorite character, whose name is Pliny Winthrop. He's also one of the owners of Osprey Island. He's a retired minister, 85 years old, and he was a very close friend of Paul Brearley's and a mentor to him. And he has never really gotten over Paul's death or disappearance 18 years before. So in this scene, he and Fred Davis have discovered by looking at old photographs that a body found on nearby Burton Island was in fact Paul. So he's learned in this moment what he was beginning to suspect, that Paul had been alive. So Pliny has to call his family members and Paul's family members and tell them what's happened. So this is his call to his daughter, Abby, to Pliny's daughter, Abby. "Abby, it's me. It's definitely Paul, not a shadow of a doubt about it. I saw a photo of the body." "Okay, Dad, what happened? Tell me exactly what's going on up there." Pliny told her about the photographs, about telling the story to Davis, and about seeing the Brearley's house in a shambles. He looked the same in the photo, really, just a little bigger. A lot more worn, of course, but the most disconcerting thing, he had this funny little beard. Somehow that bothered me. Right now, I don't know how Paul got there, who else was there, who shot him, or why. They don't really know that he was shot on Osprey Island. That's just a surmise. "Dad, tell me, what do you feel about it?" "When I figure it out, I'll let you know. I'm wandering around in a fog. My assumptions are all tossed up in the air. I missed him before, and it turns out he's alive, then he isn't, and he's killed in this horrible way. What does it mean for us? How does it change how we think about things?" He could sense Abby getting a little bit angry, but controlling it in an almost parental way, as if she were looking at him sternly through the phone wires. "Dad, I want you to listen to me. I know I'm wasting my time saying this, but please listen. I'm sorry this all happened, though not altogether surprised. I loved him too, but the Paul you mourn died a long time ago, if he ever existed. Paul wasn't the saintly guy, the steady guy you remember. We kids knew him in a different way than you did. We didn't really like the perfect boy thing. It was a little put on, a little much, a bit contrived. It's annoying to be around somebody who's always nice, always helpful, but who also always wins the games." We were angry at him a lot. For a while, when I was about 15 or 16, I was enamored of Paul. One summer we explored being a couple. We spent a lot of time upstairs in the boathouse in the late evenings. But I found it heavy lifting being with someone who's trying to be good all the time. It's not that satisfying. I just wanted a boyfriend. Okay, that's it. And I want to do my little show and tell, though, before we start doing questions or comments. Also, comments, too, are good, too. This is the cover painting, which Susan Riley, who lives around Montpelier and is a wonderful painter, made it with a great deal of effort. But I think anybody from South Hero who really lives in South Hero will vaguely recognize the picture, the scene, which is looking off very early in the morning toward the Vermont mainland. A view which I saw many, many times from my trailer. Okay. Back to you.
Great. Thank you for that. And if anybody has any questions or comments for Sam, feel free to pop it in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll just start reading some questions for you. So we got this via email, and people have asked this question a few times, and I feel like you probably get this question a lot, but this is from Rich Monteroso. And he said, I really enjoyed his characters and intricate plot, featuring many familiar locations. Since many of us enjoy mystery series, would Mr. Clarke consider more novels featuring Fred Davis and his colleagues solving mysteries in our area?
I don't know if I can do this again, but I am working on it, and some ideas. I'm trying to do that. Yes, maybe. It took me a long time to do this one. So.
Along that line, Tom Fells wrote, this is a very substantial book. How long did it take to write?
That's a pretty good story, actually. The day I had been, a lot of the themes and scenes and ideas in the book are things I'd been trying to write about for many, many, many years. I have a whole drawer full of, memoirs and personal essays and things where I was not very successfully writing about this stuff. And I had the day that Obama was elected the first time, literally that very same day, I was on my bicycle biking home from Barrie to my house and got hit by a car. So I was pretty banged up for about 2 months. I had my shoulder blade, different things. I was kind of injured. So it gave me an opportunity to I had to do something with that time. And somehow it occurred to me, maybe these ideas and these places and the idea of boats and being on the water, all those kinds of themes and the kind of religious angle, all that stuff. Well, maybe those would make a good story in a mystery novel. I like good mystery novels. And it seemed like the Inland Sea was a wonderful setting for a story. And also I felt just the name, the Inland Sea, was a great title. So I just like before I ever came here, I liked the place because of the name. So that's how it came about. But I worked on it for maybe a year or a year and a half then, and I couldn't get it published. And then we picked it up again a year and a half ago, maybe. So the answer is it took 12 years, but not really. Really, I worked on it for a year and a half, then I worked for it again for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the religious aspect of your book, and so Tom once again asks, there are a lot of religious content in the book. What is the origin of this?
The origin of it is that I grew up in a family and in a community similar to this, where there were a lot of religious people like that. Both of my parents were ministers. My grandfather was a missionary. There were a lot of, philosophers and religious people in the family. And I felt that, and that was the milieu that I grew up in and that I was not entirely comfortable in. And I also learned through experience that, like as described in one of those sections that I just read, that a person who's trying to be virtuous all the time can get into some serious trouble. Maybe in a nutshell, that's what I learned in the first part of my life, that a person who's trying to be virtuous all the time can get in trouble sometimes. So it doesn't always work. So in a nutshell, that's the origin of the religious ideas. People struggling with, who come from this New England religious tradition of Quakerism and also, the Congregational and Unitarian churches, people like that, how they navigate a modern world. And that was a big thing to me in my life and still is.
All right. So Sharon wrote, Sam, which character do you identify most with?
I don't know, but it's been fun because other people have said that I was this character or this character, but it's never the same character. So I don't have a particular character that I identify with, but I identify, I suppose there's little bits and pieces of my life and all, I don't know, isn't that the way it is in fiction? You have nowhere else to get ideas from, but from what you experience. But I don't have a particular character that is me. Somebody said I was Pliny, but I'm not Pliny. I don't know. No answer.
Okay. Let's see. And Dave McCann wrote, how does writing connect with home design?
I've known David a long time. He and I were roommates in college, and he was the writer in our foursome, in our dorm suite, and I was not. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. How does writing connect with home design? And I'm also curious, do you do home design? Do you build houses or design homes?
Have done all kinds of building right now. We're doing a lot of shop work, cabinet work and stuff. But I've built lots of houses and I've designed a lot of houses. And I've written building books. So in thinking about it, I thought that it isn't completely different to write a novel and to write a building book that describes how to build a house. It's not as dissimilar as you might think. You still have to take a tremendous amount of information and put it in a coherent plan so that there's a connection there. It isn't as if that I had to start to learn to write from zero. I had done a lot of writing. It was just about house building or kitchen design or something. So you still have to be able to, form a sentence and organize the whole thing. And to build a house too, building a house, you're taking a lot of parts from all kinds of different places and putting them together into something that seems coherent. That's what building a house or building a kitchen is. You want to take all these parts that are unrelated and make them and relate them together. So that's not so different than writing a story like this, I don't think. At least it helped me, the idea of being able to organize information. Use some of the same skills, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Great. Deborah writes, for fans of the book, would you consider leading a bike and boat tour of the places in the book?
Yes.
Great. Maybe we can connect and do it through the library.
I've got a boat very like Fred Davis's that would make that way fun once we are free of this epidemic thing.
Yeah. Great.
That would be a lot of fun. It could be like a picnic thing.
Let's see. Do you have a theory in your mind? And sorry, this question is from Gail Falk. Do you have a theory in your mind about why Paul walked away from his life?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the stuff that, his wife talks about toward the end of the book illuminates it more than anything. I think, my feeling is that sometimes in this story, the male characters have sort of a head full of ideas. But some of the women characters are a little more grounded. And in a way that, Abby, that section that I read from Abby, Pliny's daughter, that to me is a pretty good, I kind of agree with Abby. I agree with Abby and with Paul's wife when she talks about their relationship. Those are the things that seem to me to best explain what he did. But also he says, so somewhere he says, I don't know if I'm giving something away here for people who haven't read it, but he's somewhere in the book, Paul says, what, one thing I've learned is you can destroy your life in a minute. You can do something that totally changes everything in a minute, or words to that effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think he would have, if he could have taken it back, he would have taken it back. That's why he comes back and visits this island all the time.
Mm-hmm. Kathy Rude writes, how did you get the idea to write this book, and how do you know the island so well?
For 6 or 8 years, we had a trailer, which we were very fortunate to buy cheap, in a campground right in South Hero. So we spent those years just spending on the islands themselves and in the inland sea boating, and just boating all around there. And we just loved it. We had been there before then, and we've been back too. We lost the trailer at a certain point. But so we spent these 6 years hanging out there. I'm sorry, I lost the second half of the question.
Yeah.
That's why I know about it, because all these places in this thing, I've been to all of these places. They're completely real to me. The only thing that's not real is Osprey Island. Everything else, the sandwiches are real. Those are real sandwiches that I had in the Champ Diner near the ferry. All that stuff is what I experienced. And anyone on South Hero would have experienced those same sandwiches at a certain time period.
Were they good sandwiches?
They were fabulous.
Do you like writing about food?
I don't know. There's certain things I like to write about. I'm not like a lot of mystery writers really are mostly writing about food. There's several series that are mostly revolve around the food preferences of the writers. That wouldn't be me, but.
Yeah, sure. So Richard Lathrop writes, where did you first get interested in police and detective work?
I don't think I was particularly interested at all, except that I read a lot of mysteries, and I particularly like the Martin Beck. I wanted to mention this before. I love the Martin Beck stories. I don't know if anybody here has read those, but they were popular in the 60s, a series of 10 books set in Sweden. They were sort of the beginning of Swedish noir mystery writing. They were beautifully written, and they had a very simple style, which I admired. And they were about the lives of these police characters, maybe 6 or 8 characters who work together and solve various things. And I was very drawn to them, to these characters and the way they were written about in these books. And so I liked the genre. I liked reading those books, and it sort of fit for me. But I didn't really know that much about, the nuts and bolts of it. So I got a lot of help from Chief Bombardier, who's the police chief in Barrie, Vermont, and who is from the islands and knows the area intimately. And he sort of sorted me out when I did completely, when I made mistakes in the writing. And that was a big help. And a lot of stuff I just made up out of thin air, all that stuff that happens up around the Canadian border. I have no idea if that's real or not. No one objected to it, so I left it in. I didn't research it in the slightest, except I'd been to Canada by boat many times. I thought it was a form that fit the things I wanted to talk about, given the place. That's all really. Excuse me.
Yeah, no. So what other mystery writers and mystery series do you like to read, or did you like to read, or inspired you?
I don't know. We really like the Donna Leones, which are in a funny way similar. They're kind of literary, and they're about the detective and his family as much as they are about a particular crime. I like that. There's one we've been reading recently, which is Bruno something or other. They're set in rural France, and they are really more about the food than about anything. They're more about the guy's dog and his food than they are about the actual mystery. But we like those. And right now I'm reading actually Nine Tailors, which is a wonderful, the best of the Dorothy Sayers books, I think, or one of the best. And Sherlock, of course, the classic Sherlock Holmes.
Let's see. Bill and Shar wrote, why did you choose to make the Key Island one that does not exist?
The island does exist, almost, somewhere else. I grew up on an island in the Adirondacks, and I had such an intimate knowledge of every room of every house there, of that place, and I loved it. And I no longer have that house, which I grew up in as a kid in the summers. So since I didn't have that island to go to anymore, I just picked it up, and as if I picked it up with a bunch of helicopters and moved it and dropped it in Lake Champlain. And I also thought the idea of an island that several families share, that seemed like a good storytelling device too. So the people who inhabit the Osprey Island are not particularly like the people at the island I grew up on, but physically, the idea of a bunch of families that live nearby and that have a life together over, just the idea of a bunch of teenage kids being together on an island and what they do after dark, and the boats and the boathouses and all. It just seemed like a really rich environment, and I didn't have that island anymore, so I just brought it in. It was my way of enjoying the island again.
Great.
And also the houses were so cool there, so they made really good settings for what happens in the story.
Great. Norma Denbrook writes, the padlock combination is very clever. And this may be a spoiler. Did you come up with that? Thorsten figured it out. It might be 2 feet is 24 inches and 3 feet is 36.
That's it. But for me, I have to admit, I don't know if Larry Duberstein is out there this evening, but that's where I got it from one of my former woodworking partners, that we always had used that combination, and that was his idea. And for exactly that reason.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Richard writes, do you think this would make a good film? And what are the possibilities?
I don't know.
Have you ever
Of course,
thought
every author must think that their book would make a great film. But right now, I'm really happy just that people are reading it and enjoying it, and I've accomplished my goal. It's there, and people seem to like it. So that's as far as I've gotten with that.
Yeah.
I'd like to get it read. Most of the people who read it are kind of in New England, Boston, places where I have connections, places where people in the publishing house have connections, which is Rootstock, by the way. It's important to mention that this is published by Rootstock in Montpelier. I didn't mention that earlier. They've been terrific to work with. So I'd like to get it out a little further into the world. Although one of my friends said that they were using it. Someone in Somerset in England had read a copy, had gotten a copy and had read it. So we've made it to at least one tiny little corner of England. So that's
international.
International, mm-hmm. Yes.
And so any plans for a book tour? I know it's an interesting time to be doing a book tour because everything is online, but it also kind of makes it easy to do a book tour. Any plans for doing that?
What would a book tour be? We're going to do more things like this, I hope. That's a book tour.
That's a book tour.
I like the idea of a boat. I love the idea of a little trip to the different places, a little boat trip around the inland sea, or a bike ride. You could do a wonderful bike ride going to the places that are in the story. It would just be a lovely day ride with a little lunchtime of boat run out to Burton Island there. That would be a lovely day, lovely little day trip.
Yeah, we would be happy to help plan this.
Yeah, no, that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
Probably some
summertime.
Probably some of the other folks from locally who read it have boats, so we can do that.
Yeah. So Dick Cluster writes, what was the most surprising thing that happened as you wrote this book? Either the book itself or the process, or now that it's been released?
Not sure, but one thing is that I experienced was that certain parts of it just kind of happened. I didn't think them at all. They weren't intentional. Some parts, Paul and Fred, I kind of planned them out. But Pliny, he just appeared in the story one day. He just walked into the story. And there are other parts of the story, little plot twists and things that I didn't consciously put there at all. They just kind of happened while I was sitting there writing. So I'd say that was pretty interesting to me. It's also really interesting to me that I enjoyed trying to write some fiction. I love to write. I've loved to write for many years, and I wasn't particularly good at it. And I had to learn from my friends, from my partners, kind of who were writers. My woodworking partners were often writers, and they helped me get a little better at using words. And I came to really just physically enjoy writing. To me, it could be a lot of fun to write about kitchen layouts or roof framing or hammers, but it had never really occurred to me that I could or would write fiction. I had never written so much as a one-page short story. So that in itself, that whole project was a surprise in that way. So, and I see on the screen, George Springston asks me from Plainfield, asked me if I've worked on boats much. No, not much. I'm not a boat builder person at all. I worked a little with my granddad on a couple boats, but no, I hadn't. I wasn't like, Fred Davis, that I was an expert in working on boats, not at all. Fred Davis, in that respect, is who I wish that I was as a woodworker, but I am not.
Let's see. Susan Riley writes, Sam, seeing as you are a kind and decent man, as I know, I am wondering if it was hard for you to write about the actual murder. The scene was described very, very briefly.
I felt that's interesting. I mean, I've read books where they really go on, where you really are dragged through it, something like that. I was not that interested in that. To me, that was just a plot device that kept the whole thing moving. And the character of Skip, when I wrote it, I just put him in there because I needed that element to keep the story going. It was really only later that I began to think more, as the book went on, to think more about what that character would be like. But I think Susan's completely right. I didn't want to get into anything gruesome or anything like that. And the whole thing is over like in a flash. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't my main interest in a way. I was interested in the story. I was interested in Paul. I was interested in Fred and what they were going through. But yeah, yes, I was uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. All right.
Somebody asked me, had I ever met anyone like that? And I would say maybe a little bit. I thought, well, I've met two people that are a little bit like that guy, the killer guy, the bad guy.
All right, and let's, why did you name Osprey Island Osprey Island?
I don't know, it sounded like there might be an island there and there wasn't already an Osprey Island. All these lakes have a gull island. Mm-hmm. I don't know, just popped into my head, and I liked ospreys. I had seen right in Keeler Bay, which is the bay right near where the library is. I saw an osprey come down, because they put up osprey nests all through that part of South Huron. So they make it good for the ospreys by giving them a place to go. And I just happened to see an osprey dive down and pull a fish and fly away with this huge fish in its claws. So I was always very struck by that image, and just seemed like a good name. But no reason other than that. I could believe there would be such a thing. Bass Island. There's probably a Bass Island somewhere there. Mm-hmm. There's always a Two Brothers Island.
Oh, interesting. A couple of people have asked where they can pick up the book, so I popped the link to Phoenix Books in again. It's a local Vermont bookstore in 3 different locations in the state, and they all have it in-house when we started this webinar, but you can order it online and have it shipped. So that is one local place where you can buy Sam's book. And so if anybody has any final questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. I'm trying to see.
What's the rest? I see one at the bottom. You carefully captured the theme of Small Vermont Farm, but I can't see the whole question.
You carefully captured the theme of small Vermont farm expectations of family members. Do you have experience with family farming in your background?
No, but with family businesses, yes. I'd say. No, just from being around. No, not personally. No. But I really got interested in the whole farm, in all that whole family, and the farm, and as an institution. But also there are farms around South Hero that are a little bit like this. That farm is not that different from, Allen Brothers or some of the other really wonderful farms. And you can imagine, in my imagination, it's not hard. It's not a big stretch. It's not a stretch, let me put it that way.
Somebody asked, have you sailed through the Kitchen Islands? And I think we've gotten a couple of questions about the Kitchen Islands.
Have I what?
Sailed through the Kitchen Islands.
Have I sailed through the Kitchen Islands?
Yeah.
I don't even know where that is.
I don't either. Oh, a joke.
Oh, I get it. That's could be real. And here's Jim Rader. Okay. I look forward to reading your novel. That's nice.
Oh, what has been the reaction from family, friends, and acquaintances to your novel?
I thought I was a little worried. So far, people have been very nice about it and have liked it. Of course, my family members know a lot more about where some of the things in the story come from, even though it's not literally about my family or anybody exactly in the family. But I was a little worried about that. But everybody's so far been very nice. They like mystery stories.
That's good. I know the response here at the library has been very positive from the people that have read it so far. So, Sarah Phillips asks, Siberian peach pie, where did that come from? And do you have a recipe for that?
I'm so appreciate this question. I grew up, my dad worked in a Quaker school in Poughkeepsie. And there was a skit. The first time I ever got to go, it must have been about 7, I was allowed to leave the house in the evening and go to some event. And there was a Shaggy Dog story about somebody searching for a piece of Siberian peach pie. There is no such thing as a Siberian peach pie. It's just an element from a joke that I remember from when I was 7. And I'm going to ask my sister if she remembers that joke the next time I talk to her.
Let's see.
This sounded good. Sort of had a nice sound to it, but there's no recipe.
It does. I would order that pie. I thought the character, so Norma Denbrook writes, I thought the characterization of Fred's father was beautiful. Is this character based on someone you know?
Oh, I really appreciate that thought because I really like that character very much. And it wasn't specifically based on any one person, but based on a lot of farmer guys and that I have known, people like that, old Quakers or old farmers around where I live in Vermont. I have met people like that. So it's a composite, but it's definitely a character that I feel very warmly. I don't know how you can feel warmly to a character about a character that you invented, but it felt when I wrote that character, I felt like, I've got, this is a real thing. This is a real kind of person that deserves to be stuck in a book and taken seriously. One of the things I want to mention is, actually, I think very often some people have sort of denied that this could possibly be true, but to me, a big important theme of the book is simply work. That people work, and very often people who work with their hands, who make things, who build things in mystery stories and other novels, are really treated as comic characters, as if they're not, as if they're and not as smart or as accomplished as someone who was a professional or who writes books or who is a minister or something. So to me, the characters, there's quite a lot of characters in this story, as there are in my life, of people who are working people who are very, very, very wonderful and very smart, and who have applied their intelligence in that way. Fred's dad is very much one of those people. And so that to me was an important thing to do with the book, was to portray people who work with a lot of respect and love. And so that's really, I know any number of people around Plainfield or other places that I've worked who are like that, who are not necessarily, they might be educated, they might not, but that's an important part of what I was trying to do. Because a lot of times you read a mystery story and the carpenter is, made fun of, or, he's in there for comic effect. So that if I had a purpose in writing the book, that was definitely in there.
Let's see. Richard writes, there are some loose ends. Have you ever thought about writing something such as Skip's court trial, etc.?
There's a few loose ends I have thought about picking up and may pick up. Not that. That's what Susan Riley said earlier. In a way, I wasn't that interested in Skip. I'm not that interested in the killer. So if I could avoid that, having to write about that, that was kind of a plus for me. So I was very happy to kind of end the story and not get that involved in a court case or any of those things, even though they might be very interesting to other readers or writers, but there are definitely threads that really interest me. I'm interested in what happens on Osprey Island, what happens to those people, what happens to Pliny's boathouse. I'm very interested in how the boathouse is holding up against the weather, and I'm very interested. Many people have asked me, do Fred and Diane get back together? I have to write another book so that I can answer the question of whether they get back together. So there are threads that I'm particularly interested in following up.
Well, we fully support the writing of another book.
Okay.
Henrietta Splain asks, have you thought about setting future books in some of the other 800 ponds and lakes in Vermont?
What I thought about is stretching out into the canal system, which is sort of what I got interested in the very first. So I haven't thought about like the small lakes or smaller lakes around, but I have thought about, I love the Erie Canal system, the Champlain Canal and the Erie Canal. And actually there's a whole genre of mystery stories set in canals, set along the canals in different places. So I've thought of that. Not Joe's Pond down the road, but.
Jane said, yes, canals. So we have canal enthusiasts.
Jane knows about canals.
Great. And so Mark Huddleston writes, who was the first character you developed when writing the book?
Fred and Paul. I'd say, though, really to write that story at all, you have to have Paul, and then you have to have Fred. Mm-hmm. And I really just love. To me, writing this was a way of being on the islands when we didn't have our place there anymore. To me, it was a way of inhabiting that world. That was what was fun about it. It was the dead of winter, but here I was out on the islands riding around in my boat. And I didn't even have that boat. I got to ride in boats that, Fred fixes boats that I wished as a kid that I had, that I never had. But I get to have those boats in the book because Fred is working on them in his workshop. So.
Great. I'm going to check the Q&A one more time. Oh, Hannah asks, was this Skip's first murder?
No. I see Karen Abramowitz says, spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yes, I should have said that. Spoiler, everybody. All right. Any other questions or anything else you'd like to say, Sam?
I would just say it's so interesting to respond, to hear people's questions, and to talk about it because I learned things about the story that I hadn't really thought about. So it's fun. I want to answer Erland Russell here. Was writing this story cathartic? This is from Erland Russell, one of my oldest friends back in Newton. And no. What I didn't experience, yes, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. He's asking, was the family's connections to my own family that are indirectly alluded to in the book, was it cathartic for me to write about them? And I think my answer is, well, I learned some things about myself and my family by trying to write about it, which I think is often the case. That was true of my building books too. You write about how to do something, you learn how to do it. And I think that's true with this. You try to articulate, why Paul leaves. Well, in trying to write that down and make something that's believable, you have to think about it. So I think, now that I've said to Erland that it's not cathartic, it's not exact, I wouldn't use the word, but I think it's illuminating. Not so much cathartic as illuminating, and pleasant and pleasurable in that way. So.
All right. Well, I didn't read all the comments of people thanking you for doing this because it would have gotten repetitive and boring. But thank you so much for joining us this evening and for talking about your wonderful book. I will pop in the link to buy Sam's book one more time in the chat from Phoenix Books. And for those local to South Here, we do have quite a few copies here at the library. You can get in touch with me if you want to put a book on hold. But thank you so much for talking about your wonderful book. Any parting words?
Well, thank you all for coming and listening to me read this bit and asking these good questions. Thank you all. I wish I could have seen you person to person here in South Hero.
Yeah. I think we've got people from all over that joined us tonight. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Sam, once again for your time.
Good night.
All right. Good night, everybody.